Hey sewing friends, I don't think we've talked about scraps enough yet in 2025. So today I am going to share with you some quick gifts that can be made with scraps and hopefully things that you've got already in your sewing collection. Now if you're not a huge person with scraps, have these in mind for next time, or if you get to a sewing social, ask people for their scraps or ask other sewing friends. There's always a way to find a few bits and pieces. And if nothing else, you could cut up old clothes that you don't wear anymore, because if they're not being worn, make them into something else. So today I am going to share with you how to turn fabric scraps into fabric twine that they can then be made into things. How to make an ultimately beautiful gift for people who have wires and cables everywhere, and a gorgeous little treasure box. So I have been out there looking for different ideas for scrap projects because there's a plethora, I love that word, of ideas out there right now. If you haven't seen, I'll put this up here. I did a last quick minute gift guide. And I've got my Sewist's gift guide as well. And this is a scraps gift guide. And these could be used for any type of present at any type of year. It doesn't need to be Christmas. So I'm going to start with the cable Tidies. This is a perfect one because almost everybody we know in our lives has cables now. I'm thinking right now, in my bedroom, there is a swirl of hairdryer, TV and hair straightener cables, and it's just a bit stressful. So we only need very small pieces of scraps to turn into little rectangles. We can use our sewing skills or our fabric glue skills, if we're not a big fan of sewing, to make with right sides together. So let me get to, in case you're like, Sam, what are you talking about? So these are the right sides. We put the right sides together. We stitch round, leaving a small little gap to turn it through, just like we do with any project where we want to leave the messy bits on the inside. Once we've got them like this, we're going to press them. We can then stitch round to close the hole. You could do a lovely decorative stitch, a hand stitch, you could just do a little area around, or you could do a little whip stitch and close that up. Lots of choices there. Now also, there is no set size. So if you're sitting there thinking, how big should they be, Sam? You need to think about the fact that it's got to close round to fit some cables in there. So if it's just like a phone cable, then you don't need it particularly long or wide. If, like for me with my hairdryer cables, they're much thicker, you will need a wider, longer piece. The final thing we do once we've pressed it and fixed that together is we will then put little pieces of Velcro, one on the underside and one on the upper side, so that they're use my brain a minute here. One on the underside and one on the upper side so that they match here. Now you can buy Velcro that can be stitched with your sewing machine. You can buy the stuff that's pre-glued. Watch out if you use that, because that will make your needle on your sewing machine super sticky. You could do a popper. There's so many different ways that you could do these joinings, and that's what I mean, is you don't have to go out and buy things. You could even do a buttonhole and a button so that it buttons together. So there's lots of ways to do it, but I think that these, which I've started and hopefully you're seeing a picture of them finished, are a great way. You could put them together in a little gift, like you can make a basket or something that's like a tidy tray. I would say if you're gifting these to people, I would put a label with them, either on the tag or inside, because otherwise people might be thinking, what are these funny little fabric tubes for? Or if it's like the people in my family, they're constantly losing their charging cables, I might buy them a new one and wrap it in with it. So that's my first one. I have got this far with these in 5 minutes, 3 of them 5 minutes that far. When you've got them inside out, highly recommend you trim off the diagonal of the corners, because it makes it much easier to get a pointy corner. So while I'm in the middle of creating these things, do tell me, is there a really interesting scrap or gift project that you've seen that you think I should know about? Or of the ones I've been working on, what's your favourite one? Leave me a comment below. Let's talk about the next one. Now I have this tied to a drawer handle down here. It is fabric scraps turned into fabric twine. Now, if like me, if you remember back when you were at school, you may have done something like friendship bracelets or something similar where you needed a thing to tie it on to get a bit of tension. So I've got a drawer handle that I tied one end to, because what we're doing is taking what maximum of 1 inch wide strips. Don't have them too long as you're getting a tangle, and we're twisting them together. The great thing about this is when you get to the next fabric, you'll just twist it in with the other end till you've got that, and it's not gone brilliantly there, but I've got an idea. The rest of the time it's joined quite well. I have a big collection of boxes full of coloured unusual threads, and I thought it would be quite fun to take one like this and twist this over the top, because then it gives it another layer and it secures those ends in and makes it extra level of interesting. Now you might be thinking, what on earth could I do? So I'm just going to tie it on here on my sewing machine. You might be thinking, what on earth could I do with some fabric twine? Well, firstly, it would make amazing wrapping, like to wrap your gifts with. Rather than buying twine, you could wrap with this. But also it twirls really nicely to make coasters, baskets. If you've ever seen those where you make a coaster or a basket, it works brilliantly for those, and then you can do zigzag stitch over the top. But the first thing you obviously want to do is to create your length before you decide. I'm really feeling the vibes of wrapping some gifts with this. I am on a mission to try and end 2025 with as few fabric scraps left as possible. This is one of those things, if you've got something that you can tie it to, you can be sitting in the evening chatting to other people, maybe watching a movie and just getting on with twisting and wrapping this together. So I've tied it on there because you need to be able to have that little bit of tension for when you're wrapping. So I need to wind this up so I can control the ball. Now you might not have threads like this, you might have some wool, you might have some embroidery floss, but you know, I've been and had a big dig around and you never know what you can find that you might have forgotten you've got. So I am just twisting this over the top. I could have incorporated it in, or with 3 strands I could have plaited it, but that's a lot harder to incorporate short pieces. The whole idea of the twisting of them is that you can take short pieces and long pieces and incorporate them together. If you was going to plait them, I would recommend stitching all the short pieces together so that you've then got 3 lengths that you can plait together. And we can always trim things off afterwards. The thing to remember is that if it's a really fibrous fabric in that it frays a lot, it will give you way more threads coming out from there. But as I love to say, give it a go, give it a try, because if it goes wrong it doesn't matter, because these were scraps that you didn't know what to do with and now you're finding a use for them. And also, if it doesn't work, I've shown you at least one other thing that you could do with them. So I'll hold this up now, just coming to the end where I've knotted the rest of it. So I'm just going to snip this off here. I have got this poking out, which I'm going to cut off. It is one of those techniques that it's a great way to build a little bit of resilience, because if it goes wrong, you can just unthread it and have another go. Right, he's going to get trimmed right down close because I don't want him poking out. So there we go. So that's how it's looking right now. So what I'm going to do is just pop this through my machine. I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. Crack the glasses on. I'm going to reduce the width quite close together. Let's see what happens. So, bit of advice here, your machine will need a little bit of help, a little bit tugging at the back to get it through the machine, because normally the feed dogs can grab onto your fabric, but because it's so thin they can't grab onto it all. I started out with a not quite so wide zigzag stitch. I realised I could go really quite wide. So here, this was a zigzag stitch quite short, and then up here I went a lot wider with it, and I think that works much better. Now you might be not sure about those, but if I wanted, this is giving it quite like, first of all, this would tie nicely into bows now. There you go, look. So it works quite well to tie. You could put some fray stop on but remember, if you're just doing it as like wrapping twine, ignoring my knot at the end to secure it, is start to twirl this around to make a placemat. You could even make that those scrappy roses. But I am honestly, I know that's because I'm going to carry on, so I haven't stitched there because I'm going to use this to wrap some gifts. I might in the future not use a zigzag. I might use a different one, but I'm enjoying wrapping that thread in. This one is a little bit dusty, but it's actually made from a paper bag. It began life as a brown crunchy paper bag. On the inside is velvet, and it is a little treasure box that I painted pieces on, stitched on, and you can see like there's gold zigzag stitch on here, and little bead stones that I put on. So now actually inside there's a special name, isn't there, for stones with a hole all the way through. Is lots of sea glass I must have collected at some point. So you might be wondering, how on earth, and is this a scrap thing? Yes, it is, because we need to again go back to our days at school. We need a net. So that is a cube, so we would make 6 squares into a net. Did you know there's more than 10 ways that you can make a cube net? But what we will do is do the classic cube net. So I'll draw you a picture of the classic cube net, which is what I sort of think of as the cross version. But you don't have to do that one, but you need to make sure you've got 6 identical squares. So there is the classic cube net. You need something between your 2 bits of fabric, or for example for me, brown paper on the outside, something in the middle, and velvet on the inside. Now I used to have that really stiff interfacing, but I couldn't find it, and I was thinking, if you don't have any of that, the whole idea is we're using things up. So I thought, what else could we use? Firstly, if you've got any of that really rustly interfacing that isn't, I'm not a fan of in clothes, but this is perfect for this. You could iron a piece to each piece of fabric, because then it helps to stiffen both sides before you put them together. Or you might just have some batting that you could use. What we want to do is make a sandwich of the 3 things. To start with, I wouldn't recommend cutting it exactly to the net. I would cut yourself a bigger piece of fabric that you can then stitch through, stitch on, then cut to the right size, because then you have that bit of play with like fabric stretching and moving, and you don't end up with it being too small, or because it's grown on one side and not the other. I'm actually going to use 2 different scraps for this. So obviously I've got the one I've made before, but I'm going to make one for you today. So I have some Liberty and I have some denim. We have choices about the way we can stitch these scraps together. Now I don't know if you can hear it, but steam tone again. I obviously have done the crumb quilting where you're joining pieces together to remove the raw edge. I'm going to leave the raw edges exposed on this, because by the time I've done lots of stitching over it, it will be an integral part. Now I'm just going to use zigzag stitch and decorative stitches that my machine has. Very soon in another video I will show you how to do free machine embroidery, because this would be the perfect opportunity to use that. So I'm just going to prepare my 3 layers, so my interior fabric, my stiffening, and then I'm going to add my outer layer fabrics on, because I'm going to scrap quilt them on. If you just want a third fabric, your outer fabric, then you won't need to do that part. So I'll be back in a second. Little tip here, if you don't want the stitches of your top design to show through to your lining, then you wouldn't want to sandwich it at this point. You could use spray batting, but I want it to go all the way through, so it's going to be a design on the inside and the outside. If you want the inside to be plainer, then I would just spray bat it, a little bit of fabric glue or some straight down stitches to hold it on afterwards. My scraps, I'm just going to snip pieces of this, lay them on before I do the stitching. I'm just going to cut off all these random bits. I thought I'd use denim because I thought it would give a bit of body to it as well. These have been hanging around in my scrap collection for ages, so I'm choosing to snip them into reasonably small pieces. What I'm doing is laying the denim so that I have my sandwich, which has my interior fabric, my stiffening lining, and then these guys on the top. Now, it doesn't matter if I haven't covered every area, because as I stitch it, I can drop in more pieces. The key bit here is only to keep the base fabric flat. That's why a bit of spray basting could help, but we don't need it. We don't have to have it. You might have one of these basting pens. You might have some basting tape. You might have some fabric glue, whatever works. So I am just going to change my thread because green is not the vibe we want. I have this gorgeous Gutermann variegated thread, which is going to look fabulous on the top, and I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. And the whole idea is to move around doing some zigzag stitches. You don't want it to be all straight lines, so just go diagonally, that sort of thing. I could have helped myself a bit here if I'd ironed the scraps, but we're just going to roll with it. Let me show you where we're at. So the good news is, if you look at the back, I used a very similar colour bobbin, so it doesn't really show up on the back apart from the white, but look at the way the front is looking. Now you might be like a bit scared at the moment, thinking, oh my goodness, so I've varied between zigzag and straight stitch. Remember, we're going to be cutting out a net from this, so here you can see this is rumpled a little bit. If you'd used just one fabric and then stitched on it, that wouldn't happen. So if you're scared of that happening, do that. But what I'm going to do is now switch to a different decorative stitch on my machine, because actually these wonderful layers that are building up, just I sort of just shift it as I machine along, means it's just going to have its really own unique texture. I have a tiny little hole here that's appeared where fabric has shifted, so I'm going to decide what to put on there, and I can always layer over another piece of fabric if I think there's like too much black here. I want to show you here, this turned upside down the wrong way, the fabric, so you can see the wrong side. It doesn't matter. Firstly, it might not even be in the cut when I cut the template out. Secondly, I think it gives it another dimension. I really think this area is a bit too black here. So what stitch shall I choose? Some really interesting stitches on here. I'm going to go for number 72, which is a cross stitch. Before I do that though, let's just get a little snip of the fabric to put in that little area there. Okay, I've got to show you this. Look at that stitch across the middle there, but look at what happened. I caught that on the back. We'll work it out. First of all, we'll check if we can avoid it with the template. I was having too much fun on the front. Can you see like this stitch here? Because remember, this won't be in its entirety because I've gone diagonally, and if you think of that template, it'll just take part of it. So what I'm doing now is just looking to see if there's any loose flappy bits that will need stitching. Sometimes your machine will get a little bit upset when you're doing something like this, because you're putting, you know, I put in 3 thicknesses through, I'm asking it to move around a lot, and so I have had to rethread a couple of times, but it's not the end of the world and it's fine. Oh, 32 on my machine, it's like a heartbeat monitor. Another question I'm asking myself, why have I never done this heartbeat style stitch before? This is the thing. Grab some scraps, grab a few bits, have a play. If it goes wrong, no one needs to see it. So what I'm going to do now is cut the template out and cut to the finished version for you. Okay, so I went for this shape net because it made it possible to get round the accidental issue I'd made at the back. What I have done is stitched down each of the lines to divide up the squares. It gives this fold in it. I have zigzag stitched, it's not 100% done yet, but I have zigzag stitched over this edge twice because this will be the top edge of the pot. I have also done the same along these 3 sides because they will be the lid. So if I show you what I mean, this will come around here, and then that will be the lid. So you need to have zigzag stitch around them and around them, so you've not got raw edges. And you can see here, this has now got a nice hinge to it. I pinched it closed and just did a straight stitch really close to the edge, because that gives it its hinge. So the final step is to join these other pieces together. They are raw edges at the moment. Now, my preference is to pinch them closed and zigzag stitch, then I pinch the next two and zigzag stitch. Now, if that's not your preference, you could overlock all the edges and then hand stitch them closed. I just am quite happy sort of making my sewing machine work hard. So the final part will then be to decide if I want to do a little loop and onto there, stitch any beads on, but you can see how it's looking, and right at the end there will be a little clip. If you enjoyed this video of gifts or scrap ideas, I think you'll enjoy this playlist, because this is what it's all about, using up your scraps. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to leave me a comment, tell me which one you liked, give me more suggestions. I'll see you again soon.